My name is John Sylvester. I'm a reporter with the Age newspaper. Some people call me Sly of the Underworld. There are 5 million crime stories in the naked city, and this is one of them. On a quiet Monday, Saul Solomon was banging out a few kilometres on his local gym's treadmill, trying to ignore the ringing phone in his exercise bag on the floor next to him. Eventually, the homicide detective in him made him stop and take the call. It was a colleague who said, "You better sit down. Carl's dead." For Saul, there was only one Carl, Underworld heavy and gangland killer Carl Williams, who was to be the star witness into the 2003 murders of police informer Terence Hodson and his wife Christine.
I would say 90% of what he told us we could support with corroborating evidence.
With the death of Williams, the case against former detective Paul Dale and hitman Rod Collins collapsed. It was 2010 and he'd worked the case off and on for 17 years, and the murder of Williams would be the low point of his career.
And I knew then that was probably going to be the end, spell the end of the investigation and the prosecution of Collins and the other fellow.
Saul has spent most of that career in the homicide squad in 2 stints. 1988 for more than 4 years and returned in 1996 for the next 30 years.
It got in my blood, and I realised then that this was the place for me, and I wanted to sort of stay there for as long as I could.
He is a much-loved detective known for his easy manner and dogged determination. He's worked every type of murder, from organised crime hits to cold cases to crazy cannibals. This is his story. Saul Solomon, veteran homicide detective, thanks for joining us. Now, you're a bit of an accidental detective because, tell us your background. You were born in Britain?
Yeah, I was born in England, and I grew up in a place called Coventry in the Midlands. And my parents decided to come to live in Australia in the 60s, in 1968. I had a couple of aunties out here, and we decided to pack up from the UK and come out and live in Melbourne. And the whole family, me, mum, dad, and baby sister, big sister, and younger brother all sailed out to Australia on a ship called the Fair Star in 1968.
I went on a cruise on the same ship many years later, and every bloke my age, because the booze was duty-free, they would be spifflicated by 5 o'clock, and I wouldn't drink until the evening. So when I hit the bars, the girls thought I was David Niven because I could actually speak where everybody else was rat-faced. So I remember the ship well. So you go to school, start tertiary studies. So when did policing come onto the radar?
Well, policing was never on the radar for me at any point during my formative years. I didn't do all that well at high school. I got a fairly mediocre VCE result, and I ended up doing a tertiary course. From memory, I think it was a Bachelor of Arts degree majoring in urban studies. I didn't have the foggiest idea what any of that was, but it was all I could get into at the time, and so I embarked upon that course, and within about 6 months, I realised that I just wasn't enjoying it. I didn't think there was any future in it for me. I couldn't see a path to any career, and I just thought, time to bail out of this and find a job. I had no idea what I was going to do with my life, and I was kind of a bit lost, at a loose end. And I remember seeing a fair bit of advertising about police recruits. There was a bit of a recruiting push at the time, and I thought, police force, I wonder how that would go. So I just happened to be in the city one day, and I was walking down Russell Street, and I saw the Russell Street police station there, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go in and ask some questions. So I popped in, and I spoke with an old senior constable at the front counter. There was nobody else in there but him and I. It was very quiet, and he was one of these old coppers with the. I remember he had silver grey hair, and he had the big handled moustache, bit of a gruff voice. So I asked him sort of nervously to give me some information about joining the force, because I'm looking at a career. Well, he commenced to tell me all about it, and he spent about 40 minutes with me explaining the selection process and how great the job was and what a fantastic career it would be for a young bloke like me. And I was very grateful for the time he was giving me. And next thing you know, he puts a form in front of me that he'd already filled out, and he wanted me to sign it. And I said, "Oh, what's this?" And he said, "Well, this is your application to join Victoria Police." And I was sort of a bit taken aback by that, because I didn't actually go in there to make an application. And then when I balked at it and said, "Oh, you mean I'm applying?" And he said, "Well, of course you are. Didn't you just come in before and say you were interested in a career? And you wanted to know what the police force was about? And I've just spent all this time explaining what a great career it would be. Now, what's the problem? You're just here wasting my time, are you?" And I said, no. And he said, "We'll sign it then." So I did. I signed the form, and not thinking it would go anywhere. And then I walked out of the station wondering what the hell I'd just done. And before I knew it, I was sitting there having a selection panel with 3 senior officers back at Russell Street Police Station, and this was the final step to actually getting in. And I didn't really make a very good impression of myself at that meeting, because I turned up wearing a pair of jeans and a T-shirt and a denim jacket, and I had long hair and a beard. And all the others that were going for that same interview were in suits and were immaculately groomed, and they weren't too happy with me. And I didn't think I'd get past that selection, but I did. And they next thing you know, I'm starting at the police academy on the 21st of August 1978.
And you get out of there and you end up at Broadmeadow. So it becomes I couldn't think of a better sort of learning station, because it's so busy and so spread, just different crimes, different people. But there were some murders in the area. So, sort of in a sort of second degree, you saw homicide detectives.
Well, yeah, during that period when I was at Broadmeadow, I was a very, very junior constable, and I actually attended my first murder scene, which was a stabbing at the old Broadmeadows Hotel. All the hardcore dockers, painters and dockers used to drink there. It was a pretty rough pub, and there was a stabbing there one night, and I ended up having the lowly role of the log keeper, minding the front door whilst the detectives were doing their work. And I saw the homicide squad arrive, and I was watching them and thinking, wow, these guys are really good, the way that they conduct themselves, the professionalism, and it made a real impression on me. But it wasn't until a few years later that when I became an actual detective, I ended back at Broadmeadows, but as a detective at the CIB office, and I was there for about 3.5 years as a detective. And I seemed to get involved in a number of murder investigations. There's maybe about 4 or 5 that happened on my shift. So I got to really have a close look at the homicide squad, who at that stage were regarded as the best of the best, the elite detectives in Victoria Police. Like a lot of detectives aspired to go to the homicide squad, and it was so hard to actually get there. And I could see why, because these guys were just so good, just so polished. And I guess it was because I got involved in a few of these murders that were happening in my patch that I got noticed, and it helped me when I made up my decision that I wanted to go for the homicide squad. The fact that they'd seen me in action before sort of helped me a lot to actually get a position.
Well, we'll go back to that first stint, but we're going to jump to your second stint, because that was 1996.
Yeah.
And basically you stayed there.
Yes.
Ever since.
There
were some comments on the way. So I want to jump to a particular notorious double murder, which was Terence and Christine Hodson. That was your job from the beginning, was it?
Yeah, I was on Charlie Bazina's crew. We were the on-call crew that night when we were called out to the scene of that double murder.
And Terence was a police informer.
Yes.
Trying to describe the scene to us.
Well, I can recall arriving there a bit after 8 o'clock on a Sunday night, and the first thing that struck me was the amount of resources that was already there. There were a lot of different areas of Victoria Police rocking up to that homicide scene, including high-ranking officers
who would not normally go to a murder.
No, and there was members from the Seizure Task Force there, and the Seizure Task Force was set up to investigate like high-level police corruption. There were members from the Piranha Task Force there, and even the head of the forensic science laboratory in McLeod was there as well. And I just thought, wow, this is big. It was Terence Hodson, who I knew nothing about at that stage, and his wife, Christine, that were murdered as they sat in a lounge room that had been purposely built at the back of the house, where they used to go and sit there and smoke and drink and watch television. And they were just lying there side by side on their stomachs, both just shot to the back of the head, executed.
So basically, I assume you thought they had been told to lay.
Yeah, it was clear that they'd been told to lay. They were literally 2 feet in front of the armchair or the sofa that they were sitting on, and they were just lying directly side by side. And one of them, and I can't recall which one now, even had a cigarette still in the hand. They'd been smoking. There were 2 little side tables next to the sofa where you could see where they were having their drinks. The drinks were still there. And you could actually envisage what would have happened. They would have been sitting there. They would have been told, get on your knees, lie down, and they were just shot in the back of the head, and there were shell casings next to them. And the house was immaculate, nothing out of place, no forced entry, just incredibly clinical, clean.
The bodies were found by the couple's son in their living room at 6 o'clock last night. There were no signs of a struggle. The pair appear to have died from gunshot wounds to the head.
It's extraordinary, really. It makes you think, you wonder what's happening out there.
Debate now rages over whether the husband and wife are victims of Melbourne's continuing gangland war. Police say it may yet go that way.
The deceased man had agreed to assist detectives from the Anti-Corruption Task Force.
My mother never deserved to die. My father, he crossed the line by becoming what we as crims call dogs. But at the end of the day, he was my father. And I loved that man.
Was the dog or dogs in the garage?
They had a dog, a German Shepherd, that was out the back in the backyard. That was still there. Rosie, from memory, the dog's name was Rosie. And from all accounts, was quite protective of them. However, we noticed that Rosie was acting a little strange, appeared to be a bit groggy, a bit placid. And we ended up taking Rosie to the vet to be examined. And the vet said that the dog had actually been hit on the head. It wasn't badly injured, but there was a bruise to the top of the head.
Wow. And there was a security system.
They had a security system which consisted of some cameras, and the cameras recorded movements in and around the house, which were stored on those old-fashioned VHS video cassette tapes. And how it worked was every day the tape would run for the day, and then Terry would take that tape out, put it on the mantelpiece, and put in another tape, and they're all marked, all the tapes, with the days of the week. And the first thing we noticed was that the tapes were all there except for Sunday, the day of the killing. That was gone, taken. That was the only thing taken.
I understand that the Procedure Task Force had asked for off-site cameras, but it was too expensive. So if the cameras had been recorded off-site, the tape would have still been there. But
well, what was going on at the time was, and we didn't know this until we actually got there. We found out that Terry Hodson was giving evidence or cooperating with corruption investigators in relation to another matter involving two police officers that were charged by professional standards with some serious offences, drug trafficking and burglary. It was alleged. We then determined that the backstory being there was allegations that a former member of Victoria Police may have been involved in the killings, and it all stemmed back to the arrest of Terry Hodson and two other officers who were from the Major Drug Investigation Division, and Hodson was effectively their registered informer. They were both handling him in relation to numerous drug investigations that were active. And the allegation was, and I say an allegation, although one of the members involved has been convicted of it, was that a particular case they were working on involved a house in Oakley, which was a safe house and being used by a drug syndicate to manufacture commercial quantities of ecstasy and MDMA. And the investigation had been going on for quite some time, and it was getting towards the end where arrests were about to be made. And the allegation was that the two members, Hodson's handlers and Hodson, hatched a plan that before the actual house was raided by the police and the operation wound up, they would go in and steal all the drugs and the cash that was inside the premises. There was meant to be about $750,000 in cash and thousands of ecstasy and MDMA pills. So they were going to steal the lot, split up the cash 3 ways, and Hodson was going to traffic the drugs, and the profits were going to be split up 3 ways. And on the night that they decided to actually do the burglary, Hodson and one of the handlers got caught at the scene. A neighbour saw two males dressed in dark clothing with overcoats breaking into the house across the road from him. He rang 000, and there just happened to be two canine units in the area who responded immediately, along with other uniform units. And the police dogs tracked Terry Hodson and his handler, and they were both arrested. And the handler was injured during that arrest. He resisted arrest, and he got a severe dog bite and was taken to hospital.
One of the coppers is Dave Michel, who was convicted. Did he actually go up a tree?
I don't know. I'm not aware of that. I know that he put up a struggle and he tried to take on the handler to get away. And he come off second best.
I think he tried to go up a tree, and he was saying, "I'm trying to find the crook."
Yeah.
And when he got down, he made the mistake of punching the handler. So the dog took a dirty big bite out of him. He punched the dog, which the handler didn't like. So he hit him with a torch, and I think he gave him a depressed fracture of the cheekbone.
Yeah.
So he had a big bite.
Yeah, he did.
And so it was a bad day.
And then he ended up in the back of an ambulance.
Yeah.
Police claim it's Victoria's largest ever ecstasy bust, netting 200,000 tablets, ice, LSD and more than $200,000 in cash. But the operation has claimed one of its own, a detective senior constable from the drug squad. The off-duty member was caught coming out of the house.
It was an important drug haul for police, 200,000 ecstasy tablets found at this East Oakley address, along with $200,000 cash. But what made the bust even more extraordinary was the discovery of an off-duty police officer coming out of the house, 33-year-old Detective Senior Constable Dave Michel. When questioned, he allegedly attacked a dog squad officer.
So this is a big deal, and it must have been obvious to you. Obviously, you'd look at other things, but it would have looked obvious that it was an attempt to silence Hodson. Now, there would have been only a pretty select group of crooks who were ruthless enough and competent enough to get into the house and do it in that manner. But it didn't become a task force. It was left with your crew. It
was left with our crew for the best part of, I'd say, 3 years.
Had you made any real progress?
We made a lot of progress in we kept a completely open mind about all this. Sure, we had that information about Terry Hodson and his two handlers, the two officers, being involved in that burglary, and then Hodson ended up rolling on them, cooperating, and was going to give evidence against them. That was high on the list of motives. But still, it wasn't we hadn't yet decided that was the answer to it. We had a lot of other serious criminals who had an axe to grind with Terry Hodson because it became known that he was a police informer. And some of these people, were serious, dangerous, ruthless, organised crime figures. So we had to go through the process of looking at every one of them and seeing if we could exonerate them or implicate them. We weren't just settled on the burglary at the drug house as being the reason for this. Did we make progress in terms of actually establishing the real offenders and the motive and settling on it? At that stage, no, but we did end up charging a lot of crooks along the way with various offences during the course of the investigation. And it wasn't until 2007, like 3 years later, that a task force was formed to actually take over the investigation and continue it on into the future.
Now, a lot of the roads at that time were heading towards barrister that we now know was a police informer in Nicola Gobbo, because Gobbo was Hodson's lawyer.
Yes, yeah.
She led a double life representing gangland clients like Carl Williams and Tony Mockbell, all the while informing on them to police. This is the biggest legal corruption the state has ever seen. So big, it sparked a royal commission. It wasn't until
In the beginning, Nicola Gobbo was of interest to us only because when Andrew Hodson, that's Terry and Christine's son, and daughter Mandy, when they arrived at the home of their parents and found their parents murdered, they didn't ring the police first. They rang Nicola Gobbo. Andrew rang Nicola. She was the first person that was notified. And that was of interest to us. And she appeared to be involved in a lot of the other players or individuals that we were interested in. She just seemed to be in the thick of it all. We weren't suggesting that she was involved in the killing, but she just seemed to be in the thick of all the action amongst these people. So, and we did speak to her in the early days. I think Charlie Bazzina spoke to her, interviewed her, and got an account from her. But we had absolutely no idea of who she was. Well, when I say who she was, we had no idea that she was a registered informer, absolutely none. And then later on, when it became a task force, the Petra task force, and I was seconded on that task force, we became interested in Nicola Gobbo again, just to follow up on what she knew or what she didn't know and what Andrew had told her, and, you know, that type of thing. But she wasn't an informer for us. She was just someone that we needed to speak to. We spoke to a number of well-known members of the legal fraternity in relation to that investigation. She was just one of them.
While we take a short break, here's a suggestion. Why don't you leave a review on either Apple or Spotify, such as the one from Knackers, who says, this old chestnut. And shout out to George, who responded defending us, saying, shut up. It was a great listen. Well done, George. You're on the Christmas card list. Some of the comments get quite spicy, but if you want to have a look, have a look. So we get to the Petra task force.
Yes.
And so the most notorious hitman probably in Victoria, probably in Australia, was Rodney Earl, a fella who was absolutely ruthless. And you'd had some dealings with him at Broady, and we'll get to that. But when did Collins actually jump into the frame?
Well, Collins jumped into the frame shortly after the task force was formed. Because, like I said, we had already had a close look at dozens of high-level criminals, but nothing was jumping out. We weren't making any breakthroughs through those inquiries, and the Petra task force was established, and it was around that time that I actually read an article that you had written in the Age. It was a short article, and I was at home and I was reading it, and you were writing about Rodney Charles Collins, and you were referring to him as the Duke and the Fox, and it was just a story on him. And I was interested because I had some dealings with Rodney Collins over the years, mainly when I was a detective at Broadmeadows. And then when I went to the homicide squad in 1988, there was a double murder that was ongoing at the time. It wasn't my crew, it was another crew. And it was the murder of Dorothy and Raymond Abbey, a husband and wife that were brutally murdered in their own home. And I recall the crew that was working on that case Rodney Collins was a person of interest to them. And the nature of that case was you have a husband and a wife at home with their little children, 1 o'clock in the morning. Three males arrive at the door. 2 of them are wearing parts of a police uniform, and they had a folder, and they were announcing themselves at the front door that they were police there to execute a search warrant. So it's pretty brazen. And the police uniforms were police uniforms, and they were actually stolen from a dry cleaner in Preston. Then you had Raymond Abbey taken out to the back of the property into a shed where he had a safe and kept a lot of his contraband there. And he was found in that shed, executed to the back of the head, shot once to the back of the head. The killer had put a cushion over his head and just fired into the cushion and killed him cold-bloodedly. His wife was found in the living room. She had her throat cut, and she'd been shot in the back of the head as well. Thankfully, the children were unharmed. So
my memory was that one of the other offenders may have saved their lives.
That actually did happen. Yeah. It did happen.
Because the other offender had checked the house, seen the kids, and when he's come back and Rod's checking the house, he's jumped in and said, I've checked that room, there's no one in there. And the 3 kids were in there.
That offender, he's now dead. He died a long time ago of natural causes, but he actually made a statement many years later saying exactly that after the killing of the 2 people, he was searching rooms looking for cash, drugs, and he happened to walk into the rear bedroom where the 3 little kids were, and he quickly just shut the door. And as he's walking away, Rodney Collins is walking down towards that bedroom door, and he quickly said, no, I've checked in there. There's nothing in there. And he said he did that because he knew what was probably going to happen if Collins had walked in. Because the thing was, Collins was known to Raymond and Dorothy Abbey because he was an associate of Raymond Abbey, and he'd been to the house many times before, and the kids knew him as well. Wow! So they would have been, a witness to him.
Well, for me, I looked at the Abbeys and thought, I mean, who is ruthless enough to kill?
We go back to, I'm reading this article that you've written, and then suddenly that Abbey case sprung to mind. I straight away my mind turned to Rodney Collins. And as I said, I'd had a fair bit to do with Rodney during my time before I went to homicide. And then I remember that he was a person of interest in that case, but they never had enough to charge him. And I don't even think they had enough to even pull him in for interview. And then it was almost a light bulb turning on. He had a man, a notorious, ruthless, heartless criminal who would take a life, at the drop of a hat. He goes to the Abbey place with police uniforms, executes them, and kills. And he's got a reason. He's got an axe to grind with Raymond Abbey. He's got no reason to harm Dorothy, but he has to because she's there and she's kind of collateral damage. And the way that the whole thing was done was just so brazen. And I thought, well, that's the sort of person I think we are looking for in relation to the Hodson case. But Collins' name wasn't even in the file. We'd never even considered him before. And I thought, you know what? I think we should maybe have a bit of a look at Rodney Collins. Let's just see if we can firm this idea up as to him being potentially a person of interest.
back then, I mean, I have the luxury of not having to gather the evidence.
Yeah.
But I looked at I knew Collins was involved in the Abbeys, and it was a replica to me.
Yeah, it was.
The Hodson. So he,
well, the
for
Hodsons,
me, was the sort of number one.
Their home being, their haven. He gets into the premises somehow, and he then he's after Terry Hodson. There's no reason for Christine to be killed, and he executes them, shoots him in the back of the head, just like Dorothy and Raymond, and then leaves. And the only thing taken is the video for the day. And I really had this feeling. I had this gut feeling that we need to have a closer look at Rodney Collins now. So we did, and we made a few preliminary inquiries, and it went from being a gut feeling to a theory to a viable avenue of inquiry.
Pretty quickly, you would have seen that there was a connection between Rod Collins and the drug dealer Carl Williams.
Yes.
So that firms things up. You said you knew Rod, and you were one of the only police who had a relatively civil relationship with him, but you did have a chat to him over his kitchen table at one point, and he had a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, well, this was when I was at Broadmeadows CIB. We were assisting another unit executing a search warrant at Collins's place in Broadmeadows. He lived at 34 Katunga Street, Broadmeadows, and they were looking for a firearm. And because of who Collins was and his propensity for violence and using firearms, the SOG were involved in the actual entry and secured the property. And that was done. And my role was just to sit with him and keep an eye on him whilst the search went on. And I sat with him at his kitchen table, and he actually knew me from other dealings. So he was okay to sit there and chat. And the search went on for a while, and nothing was found, no firearm. And we were about to pack up, and I sort of noticed that the whole time he was sitting there, I was at one end of the table and he was at the other, and he never moved from his position. He had one arm on the table, and the other arm was kind of sort of down on his lap. And I looked under the table, and lo and behold, there's a semi-automatic pistol mounted on a coat hanger under the table, pointing directly at me the whole time that we were sitting there talking about this, that, and the other thing. And that was a bit of a shock to the system.
He was arrested on a murder charge years earlier, and the SOG did the job. But when they found the firearm, the firing pin had hit every bullet, but had not gone off. Something was faulty. And homicide asked him what happened, and he said, "I didn't know it was you." So they believe he stood behind the window and went click, 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 and then threw it under the bed. Yeah.
Well, he was arrested. It was around 1983 or 84 for shooting two men at a house in Reservoir. One died at the scene, and the other one died months and months later. And I actually went to that job. I was doing plainclothes duties on a Heidelberg crime car unit, and we responded to the call of shots fired, one deceased in Reservoir. So we're heading up there, and one of the units gave out a broadcast of an offender seen running from the house. The term "the offender" was seen running, and a description was given. And as we were approaching the scene, we saw this guy running up the street, and he matched the description of the offender as it was given to us. So we grabbed him. It wasn't Rodney Collins. It was this other guy who just wouldn't cooperate with us, wouldn't tell us his name or anything. And he was very agitated. So I placed him under arrest, and he said, what am I under arrest for? And I said, well, you're under arrest for murder. Gave him his full caution and rights, put him in the back of the car, took him to the Reservoir Police Station and handed him over to the homicide squad. And it turned out that he wasn't the murderer. He was at the house and had just run out. He was running for his life, but he just didn't want to cooperate with the police. And then when they do get on to the murderer, who turned out to be Rodney Collins, the homicide squad do their arrest, use the SOG. They do an entry to his property. And as you say, John, he was found in the possession of a loaded handgun, and he'd pulled the trigger because there were firing pin indentations that he had pulled the trigger, but the gun hadn't gone off. It had misfired. So that you can see that any time you go and do a search warrant on Rodney Collins' place for firearms, you better take the SOG with you, because if he's got firearms, he's likely to use them. And then I was called as a witness at his trial for that murder in Reservoir, and he got acquitted. And the defence used the fact that I had arrested some other guy for murder under full caution and rights to throw up reasonable doubt that it was somebody else. Yeah.
So if he's for a hard man, Rod's got a soft spot, or Collins has got a soft spot for you. Now you decide that to get to the Hodsons, let's go back to the Abbeys.
Well, when we decided that Rodney Collins was going to be a viable suspect for us to work on, I then run it through management that we reopen or review the Abbey murders, because I knew that it was he was a suspect for that, and let's see if we can bring that to a conclusion, and maybe somehow that will put a bit of pressure on Collins. And what might come up in the wash is that we get both cases solved.
So
we did.
You do the investigation and ultimately charge.
We do the investigation. Now, when I say this, I'm not taking credit for any of these things. I was part of a team that did this, and there were some excellent investigators. And we reviewed the Abbey case, and we're able to put together a pretty strong case against him, which resulted in us arresting him for the Abbeys in June of 2008. And again, we go to his address. He was living at that stage in high-rise commission flats in Fairfield. And the powers that be wanted the SOG involved in the entry, of course. But I managed to convince them that it would be better if we didn't use the SOG, and that because I had a pretty good rapport with him, if we just went there, did the arrest, low profile, no SOG, we might stand a better chance of getting some cooperation from him, because he hated being monstered by SOG during arrests. He was a bit of a sook like that. He just didn't like it at all. And reluctantly they said, all right, do it that way. So my crew went to the address. Initially he wouldn't open the door. Initially, and I started to regret that I ever come up with that idea. But then he did. He opened the door and let us in. And he had a loaded, I think it was a .357 Magnum next to his bed.
And he had a hitman kit.
and a hitman kit.
What was in it?
He had all sorts of stuff in that kit. He had this sound directional mics.
Sort of a listening device.
Listening device, yeah. He had night vision gear. He had these little mirrors that look around. You can see around corners. He had a wig. And there was also a confidential police dossier there which contained about 65 pages of intel and data that was obviously stolen, or he got it from somewhere, but it was an AFP profile, and there were dozens and dozens of names in there, and I've no doubt that someone in that file was probably going to be his next victim. And he claims he found it at a bus stop. Yeah. He had the gun, gloves. It was what I call an assassin's kit. He had a book which had all the different channels that police and law enforcement work on. Yeah, so he was pretty well prepared.
Along the way, Carl Williams is persuaded to become a witness and starts making statements about the Hodson case. How did you find Carl?
Well, Carl was the one that came forward in the beginning. He was the catalyst for the Petra Task Force to be formed, because during a time where he was about to be sentenced for a number of murders that he'd committed and had been charged by the Piranha Task Force, he approached investigators and made a statement alleging that the corrupt handler of Terry Hodson had approached him to ask him to organise someone to kill Terry Hodson, and he needed it done quickly.
Convicted of 4 Underworld slayings, Carl Williams could have committed up to 10 in a gangland war which started when one of Ginny Moran's sons shot him.
The fact is that he's a criminal. He is one of the worst serial killers in the history of this state.
He made that statement, and he indicated that he had been in a corrupt relationship with the handler for quite some time. But the statement ended with the handler allegedly going to Carl and asking, "Can you find me someone that will kill Terry Hodson quickly? I've got something else going on in the background, but it's just not happening. It's just not working. I've got things in place, but it's not happening, and I've got to get this done. It's got to be done now," sort of.
But typically, Carl tells half-truths. So in that statement, he goes...
He ends it with that.
Yeah. He said, and then our man goes off and says, "No, I found somebody else. You know, I've looked in the LinkedIn, and I found another hitman." So he puts his toes in, but he doesn't jump in.
Yeah. So that statement was the catalyst for actually setting up the Petra Task Force, and it wasn't until afterwards where we got more involved with Carl Williams, and myself and Senior Sergeant Shane O'Connell went to visit him one day in prison. This is months down the track. And we put it right on him that we went there and said to him, "Carl, you've only given part of the story. The story doesn't end there. We know that you gave this to someone. So if you want to get like full bang for your buck, you're going to have to sort of tell us the whole story." And it was a short meeting. It only lasted a few minutes, really. And he just said, "Okay," nodded his head. And then we left it at that. And it was a bit later that through his lawyer, he wanted to see us again. And then he told us, he said, "Yeah, you're right. I did give it. I gave it to Rod Collins to do."
And he said Rod was really keen to do a lot of jobs.
He was. He said that Rod had been pestering him during the gangland wars. He wanted more work, but Carl preferred to give some of the other hits to his younger cronies like Veneman and all those others.
So at this point, obviously, you're trying to turn Collins, and you've got a relationship with him. So
yeah,
you go and see him in prison?
Yeah, well, after he was charged with the Abbey murders, through his girlfriend, who was a young lady much younger than him, and she wasn't involved in the criminal world. but she was in love with him. I just never understood that relationship. Through her, he would get messages that he wanted to see me, and I would go down to Barwon Prison, and we commenced this dialogue that lasted about 3 or 4 months. And my motives were to try somehow to convince him to come to the party in relation to the Hodson murders and give it up, confess. It was a tall order, but it was worth a try. We had nothing to lose. And out of everybody, I thought that I had the best chance because I had a good rapport with him, and he was happy to speak to me. And this is what went on for the next 3 or 4 months. Me going down to visit him, trying to extract any sort of information I can out of him, trying to get him to roll and tell us what happened regarding the Hodsons. But it just didn't happen. It just didn't happen in the end. He was just playing mind games with me the whole time, keeping me on the line, asking for the most ridiculous demands that were never going to be met, and me trying to keep him on the line. And we were just sort of dancing around in this game of psychological chess, I suppose, getting absolutely nowhere. And in the end, I think it all got too much for him, and he ended the dialogue after about 3 or 4 months.
So you charge, it's on the record that former Detective Paul Dale and Rod Collins were charged with the Hodson murders, and the key witness obviously is going to be Carl Williams. Now, by law, you can't accept the uncorroborated evidence of a convicted offender. So I imagine you've corroborated a lot of what Carl has to say. So I suppose you're just waiting for a trial date or whatever, and then Carl Williams is murdered in prison. Where were you?
I was, well, just on that. You can't rely on a witness like Carl Williams at a high-profile murder trial with the reputation and the credibility that someone like he has. You need to corroborate just about everything that they say. And a lot of the work at the Petra Task Force was doing just that, just poring over his statements, and they were lengthy statements, and finding information that supported what he was saying. And I would say 90% of what he told us, we could support with corroborating evidence. I spent, me and the lead investigator, we spent 5 days with him, getting his statement off him. And it was extremely detailed. He had this incredible recall. Like, he was telling us about information reports he had been shown by a corrupt member. And he was virtually recalling the narratives on the information reports and the names and even the numbers. It was just incredible, his recall and the places where he met and was shown these things. It was all corroborated. And then on the day that he says he was approached by the handler to get rid of Terry Hodson, we could actually corroborate, and he said where it happened. We could put him at that location at that time through material from the Piranha Task Force, like a tracking device and listening devices and phone records. He was exactly at the location where he said he met the handler who asked him to do the job. That wasn't a lie at all. it was 100% accurate. And then the following day, he met with Carl met with Rod Collins to ask Collins if he was interested. He met him in 2 locations the next day, and lo and behold, through surveillance material that was on file for Carl Williams, we had him meeting Rod Collins at those places. So we were satisfied he wasn't lying to us. He's on the level.
But you still got to get him in a witness box.
We still got to get him in the witness box. So he was the main witness. The whole case was built on his statement. Without his evidence, we had no foundation. It was the cornerstone of everything. And Nicola Gobbo had made a statement as well, which was probably the second most important statement. But unfortunately, as we all know, Carl Williams never made it to the witness box because he was murdered whilst in custody at Bowen Prison on April 19, 2010. I was off duty. I was at a local gym near where I live on the treadmill when my phone kept ringing in the bag on the ground and it wouldn't stop ringing. So I decided I better answer it. And it was somebody from work who said, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm at the gym." And they said, "Well, you better sit down." And I was told that Carl Williams is dead, had been bashed to death. And I knew then that was probably going to be the end of the investigation and the prosecution of Collins and the other fellow.
The most infamous figure of Melbourne's underworld wars was reading a newspaper in the high-security Acacia unit of Melbourne's Barwon prison when Matthew Charles Johnson attacked, hitting him 8 times with the seat stem of an exercise bike. Johnson, who admitted he hated dogs, as prison informers were known, knew Carl Williams was helping police with the case.
Williams implicated Paul Dale in the Hodgson's deaths, telling police Dale had paid him $150,000 to organise the murders of Christine and Terence Hodson.
Dale was acquitted after another prosecution witness, Carl Williams, was bashed to death in prison.
Dale has repeatedly denied any involvement in the murders of Terence Hodson and his wife Christine, both shot to death in their Kew home back in May 2008.
And we know that the word was going around Bowen Prison and outside that Carl was informing, and that Matthew Johnson, huge, dangerous man, was a cellmate, as was little Tommy Ivanovic. And I know the police were a bit concerned at the company he was keeping, Carl was keeping.
I had a conversation with Carl after he had made that statement to us. And also he said he was going to give us a lot more information about other unsolved murders too, but wanted the Hodson matter out of the way first. And I put to him that I think we should move him because he's in with a very dangerous individual, Matthew Johnson, just absolute psychopath. And also his father, George, who was in the same unit with him at Acacia, was about to be released. Carl's dad was about to be released, and there was some suggestion that they were going to put in an offender by the name of Tommy Ivanovic in. Well, I wouldn't trust Tommy Ivanovic as far as I could throw him, you know. But I said to Carl, look, you've got to be moved away from Johnson because we can't have you with him. He's unpredictable. He's extremely violent. He's a psychopath. And Carl quickly pleaded with us, don't do that, because he said, I want to stay with Matthew Johnson because we've been together now for 12 months, he said, and we're getting along famously. I like him. He's not involved in any of the piranha jobs, the gangland wars. He's not involved in any of those, so he's not an enemy of mine. And I want to stay with him. And I asked him, I said, but what about the fact that you're going to be giving evidence against someone else and you've provided information to us, And he said, look, he's fine with it. He knows and he's fine with it. So, and then he put it right back on us and said, if you move me, I'm not going to cooperate any further. So what we did was we passed that on to the corrections people and told them that, we would like to see him move. But in the end, we kind of left it up to corrections to do their risk assessments and do what they have to do. At the end of the day, he was their responsibility. So we just left it with corrections, and he never got moved, and he was betrayed. He was betrayed by Tommy Ivanovic, who was present when he was beaten to death, looking straight at Matthew Johnson. He didn't warn Carl. He just turned the other way.
Yeah, and, if a piece of china or glass is dropped, where you're stunned and you look at it, and Tommy's looking the other way, and you can only imagine the sickening sound of Carl being bashed to death, and he doesn't jump, he doesn't look. And
he just turned around and did nothing.
And what you didn't know was that Tommy was getting a number of calls from a major gangland figure who was putting a lot of pressure on them about, you've got to act. You're in a group where Carl is a dog, and that particular gangland figure had a lot to lose, because if Carl had told all the truth about all the murders, that bloke would have been implicated in one of those jobs.
Yeah, that's true. We weren't aware that that pressure was being brought to bear on Tommy Ivanovic to disassociate himself from Carl, to move, get out of there, because the word was out that Carl was going to rat them all out.
And so that would have been an incredible low point in a great career, to have spent so many years working on that job, and then basically it died with Carl.
That's true. Well, we managed to get the investigation back on track again, and we were making some headway. But then the task force was wound up for reasons that I don't feel appropriate to go into now.
But the upside is that a double murder in that of the Abbeys was indeed solved.
Yes.
So it wasn't a pointless exercise. And Rod Collins died in jail. This was part one of a two-parter. Part two will be on your feed soon. This episode is reported by me and produced by a jet, Julia Carr-Katzel. Mixing by the ever-reliable Cormac Lally. And our chief button pusher, of course, is Tammy Mills. Thanks to Tom McKendrick and Lisa Muxworthy. The Age's Nick McKenzie has been writing story after story about corruption involving the union, the CFMEU. Allegations include that it has managed to siphon up $15 billion from the public purse. Little known fact, if the $15 billion was in $10 notes, how far would it stretch? Well, a note is 13.7 centimetres. So if we put 1.5 billion end to end, it would be 137 kilometres. That's 3 times around the world, with enough left over to go from Melbourne to London. Second little known fact, how long would it take to print 1.5 billion $10 notes? The printing press is capable of producing 8,000 sheets an hour, with 45 notes on every sheet. So if the machine was to run flat out, it would take 273.6 days. Interesting.